present some work of mine, giving a bit of a perspective, initially talking about theory, and then as someone empirical work in this area. I think in clinical research, human lives are at stake, so we should demand higher standards. At the same time, there are pressing economic incentives, large R&D costs, and even larger potential profits. And so there is natural conflict of interest for investigators, and there is a role for regulation. And think about the drug approval process, the Food and Drug Administration, the European Medicine Agency, as well as regulation in terms of information like clinicaltrial.gov registry. So I think there is a great opportunity for economics research in this area, especially for information economics, which is the area like the interplay between economics and statistics. On the one hand, there is increasing data available for more openness. And there are very important institutional design questions. How should we design these institutions? And let me start here with a quote from Bruno, actually little known. He wrote a book on probability in 1843. And so what he had is very nice discussion, statistics with Poisson, lots of Laplace, and lots of work was done in the beginning of the 19th century in France, and they developed positive testing before the English book to some extent, and it was very popular in France and in Paris. And so, and his claim was a bit cynical, and he said that the data analyst has many attempts to change the specification. He went over detailed examples of that, and the result of that, you don't know all the unsuccessful attempts. There are no traces for that. The public only knows the result. And so as such, it will be unable to make much, lose completely credibility. Yeah? So a very nice discussion he has. This is just a bit here. And so what I'll do, I will initially go over some theory, and I look at the value of selected information. It's a very, I think, powerful but simple result. And then I'll also discuss some work I've done on the regulation of, optional stopping. And then I will go more talking about clinicaltrial.gov data and going over some work that more empirical. So now, this first is based on the paper of mine with Alfredo Di Tiglio and Peter Sorensen in Econometrica. And so we, when you think about observational studies, for example, a biased researcher who might want to prove that there is an effect or a positive effect of a policy, for example, might select sample non-randomly from a larger pre-sample. Sample selection that could be an issue. Might choose the specification or might omit controls in order to get more favorable results. And so also in the context of experiments, though they are designed to maximize credibility, there could be some scope sometimes to subvert randomization. So there is a bit of a literature in medical statistics about that. And so the idea is that you might give the treatment to the healthiest rather than to the random patients by subverting randomization and getting more favorable results. And actually, the motivation for the adoption of randomized controlled trials in medicine in the late 40s, mostly in England, with Bradford Hill, the Medical Research Council, was very much motivated by the conflict of interest, where doctors would try to push the drug that they thought it would work. And so the idea is to muddle things up. So to make it more difficult for, with masking and so on, for the doctors to actually determine whether the patient will get treatment or not.
So how did they argue? I mean, that's about controlled assignment, right, as opposed to randomized assignment.
Yeah.
It's about, was their logic that randomization was necessary as opposed
to... randomization was, partly the story was R.A. Fisher, theory. And at the same time, they used to confuse make it more difficult for whoever assigns to know, to know whether this person is going to be in treatment or control. When you select people to be in the experiment. Yeah. So make it more difficult. You reduce the amount of information they have about the patient.
Also, that the doctors wouldn't even know if the patient got the treatment.
Exactly. The masking. Yeah. Yes.
So for them, like placebo, it's like kind of double blind.
Yes, double blinding and so on. Yeah. Okay, now the idea is that in a context like this, when you have some sort of sample selection, you clearly deviate from random assignment, then on the one hand, the more favorable outcomes are going to be more likely. Yeah. So since the patient is healthier, you're going to see that heal up better, but not because the treatment is good, but just because you have an underlying condition which is better. Yeah. So you're going to be more favorable outcome. At the same time, clearly, if you know that is happening as an evaluator, you look at the data, you will actually require a higher standard. You will want to see more favorable outcomes to approve. Yeah? So because it becomes less convincing, the evidence, and so you raise the bar for approval. So the question of what would happen then when you look at all things are done, so you're actually changing the information. And the question I'm asking here is a bit different. It's a precursor to the question that Kuno was asking, because in this context, the sample selection is maybe not anticipated, or but in a way here, but it's kind of related to this question. What is the sample selection is anticipated by the evaluator? You know that the data is selected. How does it affect the value of information? The answer is non-trivial, but simple. And let me explain the main intuition based on a simple illustration. Think about there is a single data point, and in the paper we actually look at the case where we have data, a sample size which is more than one. But fixed ideas, the idea generalized. Think about this. Just one data point. You either have a data point which is random. And think about this. Here is just the illustration. It's additive noise. So we're trying to estimate theta, which is the treatment effect. And you see x, which is theta plus epsilon. Epsilon is a distribution capital F. Think about normal, where it's centered, let's say, around theta. So this is a cumulative distribution function of the normal. That's the random data. And alternatively, you consider a selected data, which is the maximum of k IID random data. Think of maximum 2, maximum 3, or maximum k in general. And so here, in the case of normal, the maximum of 2 is a skew normal distribution. It's skewed. You're more likely to see favorable outcomes. It kind of stochastically dominates. You see shifts here to the right, and and that's going to be the shape in the case of the normal. And I think I use equal to 5 in this illustration. But this shape will be something like this. The question here is, what's the value of information in these two cases? When you have random data and selected data. And it's either random or selected depending on the situation. Yeah. So let's, the framework here is really simple hypothesis testing, but the results hold more generally. But just to fix idea, think about there is a treatment effect could be actually low or high, and if you don't prove, it's here. When I mean accept is, kind of approve or kind of reject null hypothesis. Sorry about the confusion here. Right? And so here, the reject is saying is the null hypothesis, and here is the alternative hypothesis approved. Yeah? And so you have accepting is optimal if the treatment effect is more than the baseline, and rejecting so. And so here, think about there's a prior here, P, and now clearly the result generalize to, for example, like general class of preferences for the decision maker or the evaluator that encompasses Cali-Rubin monotonic decision problem, which is using statistics, as well as single crossing problems. The two are not nested. There is a more general class which is called interval dominance over preferences. But it's a more general result. And what I'm saying is actually very natural class of preferences, monotonic preferences. And so as we said, we have a location experiment here. In the baseline, it's random here, and we make a natural assumption, monotonically ratio property. Yeah, we are all familiar with. You see a higher realization, so the patient does better. You think is more likely that the drug is effective. Yeah? It's a monotonicity assumption, very natural, which if the additive noise corresponds to the density being log concave. molecular ratio. Probably we're all very familiar. And now, so in this setting here, you will, and as we saw similar formula yesterday, you will want to approve if the likelihood ratio is above echelon cutoff, which depends on the parameters. Yeah, that's the approval bar. Yeah, in the baseline. Just now, so what I'm saying here, there's this bar here, this approval whenever the signal realization is above this bar. Yeah, and you're gonna have a wrongful approval here. The drug is when the state is low, you actually approve here. Yeah, and you should have rejected. This is false positive rates alpha. At the same time, what you would do, you would reject here because of noise when you should have approved the state is high, and that's the false negative rate. Daytime, yeah, and the drug is effective, but you are rejected. Yeah, these are things that are detracting from the payoff of the evaluator, the final decision maker. And clearly, you want to minimize those two, right? Kind of weighted average of those two, false positive, false negative. Now, now what would happen now with selected information? So with selected information, you will potentially change the approval bar. Yeah? And the data will be distributed differently, would be the red case here. Yeah? Now, and the key observation is the following, is suppose you actually use the bar that actually has the same false positive rate. So basically you adjust the bar, you increase the bar of approval here from Y bar, from X bar to Y bar here at this level. So you have the same false positive rate. Let me see what I can show here. At this level. And then I'm asking, I have the same false positive rate. What happens to the false negative rate? If they go down, we're done. Now we have a more informative experiment for all monotonic decision problems. So if you hear in this graph, it so happens, this is ground from the normal, you see the false negative rate here, it actually goes down. Yeah. So this is basically what I've done here. This is just equalizing this equation here that finds Y bar as a function of X bar. So you basically have to use the quantile function of the selected experiment, invert that, the distribution function. That's how you determine this. And then you have to compute here you're looking at this distribution here of the selected experiment, compute it here. And so is that, and that's the false negative, is it lower or higher than the original? That's the question. Yes.
I guess we discussed this previously, but in a way, like the random draw seems a little bit of a misleading comparison point to me, right? As opposed to like actually like the average or other.
Yes. Okay.
Right, which is really more informative. Than...
Now, I just do the single data point just to illustrate, but the paper contains the case where you have a data point, you have n data. The sample size is n, and then you look at the average. So this is just it would use the same logic.
But I think what I'm saying is slightly different. What I'm saying is just from a social perspective, right? With like all the information to be conserved as opposed to the
sure. What we're saying is that if here I'm making a very clear comparison, which is the following. I'm comparing, I fix the sample size, and I compare selected and random data, and I'm not comparing a larger. If you have more data, the better. Correct? We know that. So, but you're asking ourselves, if you fix the sample size, and we are changing distribution, changing information, but holding fixed the sample size.
But the reported sample size, but not the sample size. Right? Exactly.
The reported sample size, we fix it, and we are changing the pre-sample size, which is something. That's a comparison. And in a way here, if you have the pre-sample size equal to the sample size, there is no solution. And intuitively, what I'm doing in the comparative studies is I increase the pre-sample size beyond the sample size, holding fixed the sample size. That's it.
But if I were a social planner, I would want you to make you report all the draws.
Yes. You would want to have all.
And I wouldn't want you to report a random draw either.
But still, we think it's useful to ask this question because it does happen, selection, and so it's useful to. I fully agree. We know that you would have more information, the better. That fully agree. Thank you. So now. So we are here, that's the question that we're asking, and so that's where we are there. We're setting the stage for the result. And so when is that true? In the normal case, you know, it works. But what's the condition? Under what condition that's the case? That's the question. And the result is that if the distribution of the maximum is less dispersed in the location case than the original distribution, i.e., at every quantile, you know, the density is higher for the selected data. You can see here, this is steeper at the same quantile. Yeah, and you see that it's almost like immediate geometric proof in that case, you know, because this is this distance here is going to be harder than that, and so it has to be the false positive rate has to go down. So that's roughly the intuition, and I'll explain a bit more. So when the key question is, when is the distribution of the maximum of k random variable steeper at every quantile than the original distribution? Yeah, that's the question. Yeah, and so the theorem is the following: is that if the reverse hazard rate is log supermodular, then the distribution of the maximum is less dispersed and more informative. Yeah. So that's the calculation here. And so in a way, you know, log supermodularity of the density is the monomolecular ratio property. Log supermodularity density implies log supermodularity of the distribution function because it's preserved by integration. And so what you're saying is that density is more log supermodular than the distribution function. It's a strong version of monomolecular ratio property. Yeah? But let me give you the intuition now. So in a location experiment, log supermodularity boils down to log concavity. Yeah? And so what I'm saying is that if you're looking at a normal, this reverse hazard rate is log concave, and so selection is beneficial. Yeah? More selected data is more informative. But if you have a Gumbel string value distribution, then if you look at the reverse hazard rate, it's log linear. The density is as log concave as the distribution function, then selection is neutral. You will adjust the bar, but the information content doesn't change. Now, what instead you have, for example, a thicker tail than Gumbel, for example, exponential data, which is like still log concave density, it's log linear, then you would have a log convex reverse hazard rate. Yeah, and so more selection will reduce the amount of information, even if you fully adjust for it. Yeah? So which means if you don't adjust a fortiori, you're gonna be worse. It depends basically on the shape of the distribution. Let me give again the intuition here. So this is the Gumbel case, and so Gumbel is max stable. It means if you're looking at a maximum of k, IAB Gumbel is still going to be Gumbel. It's going to shift it by the logarithm of k. It's kind of a parallel shift of distribution. The information value doesn't change. You have the same, once you fix you adjust the bar to have the same false positive rate, you're going to have the same false negative rate. In that case, selection is neutral, doesn't matter. What if instead you have exponential noise, and if there the maximum is more dispersed, and then actually selection will necessarily increase the errors, and so you're worse off. More selective data is necessarily decreasing the value of information, or less selective is more informative. Yeah? The more, and this is monotonic with respect to the extent of selection, the size of the pre-sample. Yeah? And instead in the normal case, you have this fact that selection is beneficial. The more selected, the better. Now, clearly, we also have results about what with infinite selection. If you fully adjust, it depends on the limit of the likelihood ratio when you get to full information or not. So, but this, I just want to give you a bit of a flavor, and clearly, this is a kind of precursor to some of the work you're seeing here, and potentially an input for a simple result. Which I mean, we're more motivated by this particular application, but in the paper we discuss application in very different fields of economics of this result.
Doesn't really have to be the testing problem, right? Like the more dispersed really means you're more informative, no matter what the subsequent decision problem is.
Yes, in a way, it's a very general result.
Some kind of Blackwell ordering type situation.
Exactly. Yes, in that spirit. Yes, yes. It's for monotonic decision problem for that class of problems. Okay. Now, the second insight I want to give you, and I'm going to be a bit less formal here. I'm going to give you the idea now. Is about, but I'm happy to take a pause and take a question on this one as well. Yeah.
Sorry, but
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Also, is there a way of thinking about this when the signal is not necessarily a location family?
Yes. Okay. This I give you the location family in terms of lock concavity in a non-location lock supermodularity condition. The paper analyzed the general case. It's a log supermodularity.
Okay.
Yes. The result is for general, it's not for location. Location is just a special version. Yes. Yes.
Okay. And then the dispersion criteria becomes.
It becomes the accuracy criterion, Lemma's accuracy criterion. Generalizing the Lemma's accuracy criterion.
Very good.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, good. Second is the regulation optional stopping. The idea is that in a sequential context, the researcher or the pharma company might, maybe especially if unregulated, might decide when to stop acquiring information, when to stop clinical research or clinical trials. And clearly these are costly, yeah. And so it might stop where where it reaches a level of evidence that convinces the regulator that, or the public at large, that the drug is worth taking. So in a way, this model is a more dynamic model, and it builds on classic approach developed by Abraham Wold, which is sequential hypothesis testing, sequential analysis. Yeah, but it takes it in a strategic context. And so now here, just to briefly highlight how it works. So this is based on this work paper with American Ray. On linking also this problem to persuasion. So the idea is there is a sender, pharma company, benefits from approval of the drug with an uncertain efficacy, like before, and now the researcher would like approval. I mean, the setting is kind of similar to what we've seen before. Now, the researcher sequentially now, however, acquires information by performing clinical trials in continuous time. In each point in time, there is a belief. And then you treat the patient, you see the patient does better or worse. And if the patient does well, then the belief is updated upward. Yeah? And if it does worse, downward. And so there is kind of this Brownian diffusion of information. But this information is costly. This instantaneous trial is generated from a state-dependent Brownian motion. And so that's where the inference comes from. Okay, so in this context, the evaluator has coarse instruments for regulation, such as approve or reject, or maybe ask for additional evidence or impose liability. And so roughly that's the framework. And so in a way here, I have two players. On the one hand, there is the researcher who directly controls the information and pays the cost, but always wants approval, doesn't care about the value of information, only cares about the information instrumentally in order to persuade the evaluator receiver.
Sorry, I missed it. What's the actual space of the researcher? Like, what can they actually do?
Yeah, in this baseline, the researcher just decides, whether to undertake research or not at each point in time. And in this very simple formulation, the information is public. And it's just the option from when to stop.
Yeah.
And there is an issue about, if information is costly, if there is a very high bar for approval, maybe you might give up acquiring information because you think it's very unlikely you'll be able to get approval. Yeah. And so this, on the other hand, the evaluator controls the approval decision, cares about the information because it's uncertain whether approval is actually optimal or not, benefit from information, but can only obtain it indirectly from the research. Yeah. And naturally, the welfare benchmark is if we actually kind of merge these two players, look at the sum of the payoffs. So you have a decision problem, which is what statistics is built upon. It looks at the social benchmark, where the rule statistician, in a way, controls all decisions. It's like philosopher king who has no conflict of interest and decides to acquire information or not, and obtains the total payoff and pays the cost. So in a way, we are deconstructing this planner to two players. That's it. And just the researcher will acquire information to persuade the evaluator. And so the paper also makes a link to very active research on persuasion, which can be seen as a limit of this model, as the cost of acquiring information, the cost goes to zero. Yeah, at least in some versions of the model. The researcher will stop.
The Bayesian persuasion model is like
Yeah, it's it gives a foundation for Bayesian persuasion. The limit as the cost goes to zero. The paper discusses this. So here is a cognitive persuasion.
You can design an arbitrary signal, right?
Correct. I agree. While here you are constrained to use that particular information, but it so happens since you can control when to stop, you can actually achieve the optimal signal. That's what we should do.
You can generate any posterior distribution.
Yes, in a way, yes. So the researcher stops acquiring costly information when cumulative evidence is either favorable enough to persuade the evaluator to approve, or so discouraging to make it economical to abandon research. Yeah, and so yeah, that's the bottom line. The evaluator, does not internalize the research cost. Yeah, and so because of that, might be forced to actually require too high of a standard because there is an externality. And so in a way, what we show is often to commit to soften the approval standard in order to encourage more information acquisition. Yeah, and so that's one of the results. But clearly, this framework, we extend in many directions, and it's actually quite a relatively simple and powerful framework. It has its own limitations because the model is clearly built with two states. There are some special ingredients in the model, makes it very tractable, while the previous results, in a way, was more general.
So like encouraging research here is in terms of the duration of information acquisition, or it's across different researchers with different priors or something?
Yeah. Now, here in this context, is the result is that you want to always, in a way, the model here has like a common prior. Yeah. And so there's kind of one researcher to some extent. And so you want to be more lenient compared to what is post-optimal for you by committing exam to be softer in order to induce more information. It's a classic commitment effect.
This is like hold up, it's not about selection.
Yes, it's just about that. Yes.
Do we want to prevent him from stopping when he's getting kind of pessimistic that will you
Exactly. We want to prevent him to giving up too early. And so we have to say, we will approve also when he's, it's not as high as it's optimal for us in order to use that. That's one of the results I want to stress. Clearly, there is very interesting work by Andrew McClellan, takes this framework and looks at the more general commitment strategy and so on beyond this. Also, when you have heterogeneity, as you're saying, different types of researcher with different problem information. That's a beautiful thing. Now, let me now get to some empirical work now. First, I want to talk about incentives across clinical phases. And this is a paper that came out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences a few years ago with Jerome Ada and a student of mine, Christoph Becker. So the question is, does the pressure to withhold or beautify unfavorable results lead to p-hacking? And here we leverage the information that is made available to clinicaltrial.gov dataset. And so we investigate a suspicious pattern that look at the distribution of results depending on the incentive resulting from the affiliation of the lead sponsor, could be industry versus non-industry, small industry versus large industry, and as well as the phase of clinical research. In particular, we look at the high-stake phase 3 clinical approval compared to phase 2 trials, the result, which is lower stake. And we look at the continuation, potentially selective continuation from phase 2 to phase 3, and that try to understand the panel result, how much of it is potentially due to selective continuation, and how much is potentially due to maybe misreporting or p-hacking. Yeah, that's the aim. Now, across different areas, but for example, here is a paper in economics. People have been looking at published results and looking at these p-hacking, and so looking at distribution of results, and they tend to be spikes in the distribution of results around significant thresholds. Yeah? 1.96 for the Z statistics, which is if it's it makes the result significant. Okay, so and this basically roughly we're trying to do something similar in this context, And so using the clinicaltrial.gov registry,
Would you have like point estimates and standard errors?
yeah, we have point estimates and standard errors, and whenever we have those, we can do this. Yes.
I guess like in a paper we will say, right, like maybe make the case that you get much more information from that relative to the distribution of p-values.
Okay.
Right, like using our meta studies approach, you can actually directly estimate selectivity, including conditional on these covariates.
Okay. Yeah.
Whereas the p-values, right, like because the distribution of p-values can be shifted by the distribution of true effects and by the selectivity, disentangling the two is really, really hard just from the p-values alone. I mean, discontinuities you can't get from normally distributed estimates.
But here, I don't think we have we don't have meta studies in this context. You know, it would not be, at least it would be interesting work to just try to say how much is replication, and you know, these are different trials.
But that's fine, right? By meta study, I just mean like a collection of point estimates and standard errors.
Yeah, but for very different,
that's fine.
Even for very different.
Just there's a lot more information there relative to just looking at the distribution of key statistics.
Okay, so yeah, so this is you know, that work we've done a bit earlier than your work, but I think yeah, that's maybe interesting to actually go on and do this kind of work in this context. It would be fantastic, yes. So this registry has been started in 2000 with objective increase in transparency, and so here we're taking that objective literally and trying to use the data. Yeah, now, through a series of legislation, the FDA Amendment Acts in 2007, 2017, you know, initially it was kind of voluntary, but more and more it became mandatory. Though the enforcement is patchy to say the least, and there is a lot of non-compliance, and pharma company really not necessarily want to report these results. And now we start seeing maybe some more enforcement for this. But what we see here, you know, the work on p-hacking has been done mostly using published papers in journals, and so now we are doing here, and we are also using this methodology here by Elliot Goodwin and Goodwin here.
How do you distinguish p-hacking from patient bias?
Yes. Okay, now let me try to, you know, here, you know, there's probably selective reporting to some extent, yeah? And so we're trying to do that also with selective continuation, and that's what I'm trying to explain to you. But in a sense, it's a bit of a catch-all and a black box what we're doing. Now, yes.
I mean, it's not clear you mentioned, I think it's a beautiful paper, but also like what they only have power against basically p-hacking in the wrong direction in some sense. Like what all they're proposing is like methods that basically tilt the distributions of p-values that you would get if people prefer insignificant results, but in the opposite direction you can't, because you can't again not disentangle that from effect heterogeneity. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's just like all the power goes in the direction you don't really care about.
I see.
Which is not a fault of their results, it's just like the nature of things.
Okay, so we have a couple of different approaches I will discuss shortly. So so what we do, we kind of transform you know, the p-values into z, and so we allow this will allow to investigate both the overall shape of the distribution and the region around significant threshold more easily. And so we have 12,621 p-values from roughly 5,000 trials in this first paper, and so we have pre-approval interventional superiority drugs on drugs. So we don't look at devices, and we also only look at interventional drugs and superiority studies. Yeah, and so phase 2 and phase 3, and conducted between 2009, 2007, 2019. And we transform the p-values into the statistics. And so here, just to give you a broad picture, what we have, you see that phase 2 distribution for phase 2 and distribution for phase 3, where you have the discontinuity here when you have all the sponsors together. And then when you actually separate, look at non-industry sponsors or small industry versus top 10 industry, the large companies, you see no discontinuity for large industry, where you have the discontinuity for small industry. Yeah. And so, and this is non-significant instead of small industry. Yeah. So this seems to be that the small industry is where really drives the discontinuity. Yeah. And so, on the one hand, there is no spike in the density, and so which is good news. So the density is not discontinuous, but the discontinuity of the distribution function is for phase 3, and potentially suggesting for some selective reporting. Yeah, and it's mostly driven by small industry, as we see, and so. We have this excess mass in phase 2 compared to phase 3 compared to phase 2. And so the key question is it due to selective reporting or to selective continuation? Yeah? And so, because in a sense, the phase 2 result should be indicative of what you will get on average in phase 3. Yeah? But if you get a more favorable result in phase 2, you should be more likely to continue. That's our story. And so we are basically trying to estimate the selective continuation. How the result in phase 2 makes you more likely to continue if it's more favorable in phase 3. And now there's differ depending on whether you are a small industry as opposed to large industry. Yeah?
Can you remind us the difference between phase 2 and phase 3 is by that safety versus efficacy, right?
Yes, in a sense.
Potentially different outcomes.
Yes, it's phase 1 is safety, phase 2 is small sample.
Okay, so phase 2
It's still efficacy,
Okay.
but it's small sample. Phase 1 is safety.
So then it's really a continuation.
It's not a continuation. Do small sample, you have a larger sample. Yeah. Okay. So and now the key contribution of the paper is in terms of matching phase 2 trials to phase 3 trials by saying this trial is basically a continuation. Phase 3 trial is a continuation of phase 2. Yeah. So an empirical contribution, and we are basically looking at intervention, condition, and timing, and creating this data set where we are matching the two, and we made it publicly available. Yeah, and so once we do that, we can see, and here is the selective continuation, the continuation function here, depending on the result in phase 2, what the predicted continuation that you continue to phase 3, and here is for all industry here. And it's intuitive that if you have a more favorable result, you're more likely to continue. And but it so happens that small industry is more likely to continue across the board. Yes, in a sense, while large industry is really less likely to continue, but more selectively.
Sorry, the ultimate approval only uses phase 3 information, or it combines phase 2 and phase 3?
Uses phase 3 information.
Okay. Yeah. So you get actually statistical independence.
Yeah. So they look at phase 3 information. Yes.
Which in principle would be wasteful in a world without incentive issues.
So what would be wasteful without?
You don't use the data that you collected, right, on the same thing.
Yes, good point. Good point. Now they probably look also at the phase 2 a bit, but mostly look at phase 3. Yes.
To a lot of these small industry firms, like we have one drug, basically.
Yes. Yes, many of them has just one drug. Yeah. And you might think they have a slightly different reputation, and they might want to sell if they actually find good results to large industry, and they potentially have a stronger incentive to potentially manipulate. And that's the story here. This needs to come out of the.
The big third like there's a higher opportunity cost. They could be pushing something else through phase 3.
Yeah, yeah, and they potentially have a larger reputational stake and so on, and maybe that could be part of it. So in a sense, let me just summarize here what we the higher stake phase 2 z-score significantly increases the probability of continuation to phase 3. Yeah. And then we have the larger company continue research more selectively. So the question is, they have a higher opportunity cost. Maybe they have other drugs to go to. They only, while the small have only one mostly, or do we have more managerial efficient decisions, or also could be that the small companies, they're really desperate to continue because that's all they have. And now
it could be like some kind of option value story where the downside risk is just lower bounded in some sense. Like there's kind of nothing left to lose if it doesn't work out.
Yes, could be also something like that, yes. Now, so what we do then, we estimate, in a way, the phase 2 density, reweighting each observation by the continuation probability predicted by the selection function, so as to predict a phase 3 density predicted by the results you have in phase 2 in combination with this selection. Yeah. Under the assumption that the result is going to be on average where it was originally, right? So, and that's what we have here. These are the phase 2 results here, and then here is in green dashed. You have the phase 3 predicted by the selection. This is for the whole industry, for top industry, and for the small industry. And you will see here that, in a sense, for top industry, the selection kind of predicts relatively well the final distribution, the phase 3 distribution, which is in gray, while for small industry, there seems to be under predicts the phase 3 results. Okay, so that's the key observation. And another way to put it here, if you look at all the industry here, so the fact that there are more favorable results in phase 3 partly is explained by selective continuation, because there are better drugs that continue, you would expect to have more favorable results. But part of it is not explained. And so you see, but for top industry is mostly selective continuation explains it, while for small industry, there is an unexplained part. Yeah?
And just mechanically, you would expect that phase 3 results should be smaller than phase 2 results conditional continuation, right? Just because if there's some distribution of true effects, you have 2 independent draws with that mean. Then the mean of like the second estimate conditional the first estimate should be like a shrunken version of the first estimate.
Mm-hmm. But
which is the opposite of what you see for the small.
Which is the opposite of what you see. Yes. Yeah.
But there is, there is in a way like you can just back out what the expected conditional expectation should be if there was no selective reporting going on.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So yeah, that's we do a kind of a version of this in a sense. And so the takeaway is that large sponsors, selective continuation can explain the excess share of significant result in phase 2 almost entirely, not so for small sponsors where selective continuation is less pronounced, can only account for less than the third of the excess share. Yeah, that's roughly the results here. And so overall, the economic sense matter. So potentially there is maybe more of a discipline of reputational concerns. That's like a potential interpretation for larger companies. Maybe smaller companies are not so subject to this concern. And there's been similar evidence that when it comes to manipulation of ratings, for example, small hotels do that, or the larger chains seems to be a similar pattern emerging there. Yeah, and in a sense, this registry and seem to help at least. And let me just then go to the next question, which occurred us a bit later. And it's kind of using the same data and updated because we did a bit later. And we're looking at pre-registration and credibility. Yeah? And let me, on the one hand, as Max already discussed, there are lots of proponents of pre-registration, but some people are skeptical about that. So, we couldn't find much systematic evidence, especially in the context of clinical trials, of where it's really policy relevant, of analysis of what happens with pre-registration. Yeah. And now, it's commonly seen as a solution to p-hacking, and it's clearly not the latest version of the slide because I added some more references also to Max paper we saw yesterday here. But now now the question here: does pre-registration in a way prevent pre-hacking? This sounds plausible, but there are some people are skeptical that really is effective. And so, in particular, we want to look whether pre-registration is a reliable signal for credibility of clinical research. It's associated with more credible results. Yeah? It's hard to have a completely convincing causal results here because of observational data, as we'll see. But at least I think we have some initial evidence here. And so here is just the preview, and you've seen roughly what we have. This speaker And what you have here from non-pre-registered results, you have, and I will describe what non-pre-registered means. It means that you already started data collection, yeah, when you register. While pre-registered just means that you register and then you start data collection later.
It's pretty massive.
Yeah, and so you see quite a difference here. Yeah, quite striking, and it's significant, and this is no significant difference. Yeah, and I will have more to say about the mechanism toward the end, but now this we use it with the data up to February last year. We focus, like before, on pre-approval, phase 2 and phase 3, interventional, therefore non-observational, superiority, non-inferiority studies, and drugs as opposed to devices. In a sense here, what you're saying, there's the start date, and you have a completion date, which you, when you register, you declare it. Yeah, and we consider pre-registered if you will then report results after typically the completion date. Yeah, and so, but if you start collecting data, that means the registration here, the start day of collection data is actually before the registration, then is pre-registered. If it's after, it's not pre-registered. And so, and out of the 50,000 trials, we have 22,000 report any results, and 4,800, a bit more because of the additional years. They provide the standard, the statistical analysis with at least one exact values that you can use. Okay, so now, so in a way here, in the absence of p-hacking, we would expect the density of p-values to be continuous. Yeah? And so what we use is an improved version of McCrary test based on the local polynomial density estimators with bias correction at the boundary by Catania, Johnson, and Mann. Yeah? And so the advantage of this method over other methods that we analyze later, like caliper test, is that with this method, we have no pre-binning, we have a fully data-driven bandwidth selection, and it potentially exploits the entire distribution. So that's the method we're using here. And so, this already gave it to you. And so this is on the primary outcome. But the interesting is the following. Let's look at the primary outcome, which you declare is what you really care about. We see that pre-registration actually makes a difference. But if you look at the secondary outcomes, then instead you see the continuous distribution. Okay, so to us, it's kind of interesting, this contrast. Yeah? Where you see this continuity in the primary outcomes, we don't see in the secondary outcomes. Please.
There may be some concern in terms of selection between different groups. So maybe the people who don't register are the ones who are more likely to be hacked in the first place.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the key concern here, in a sense. But nevertheless, our story is that we're not saying there's a causal impact on registration, but it's associated. It's a kind of indicates in terms of that is more credible. Those tend to be more credible. But I fully agree.
How does the approval process work in terms of non-primary outcomes?
Yeah,
just like nice to have kind of.
Yeah, it's nice to have, and they are more, like potentially side effects, things like that. No primary outcomes.
So you actually don't want significant effects, basically.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, and then please go ahead.
So could this be driven on the much by p-hacking? I suppose that when you don't have a pre-registered name, you find something interesting, you make it your primary outcome. So you write it around that.
Correct. That's the next. We're gonna look at that. So a natural mechanism could be that you registered, you declare a primary outcome. Now you find maybe once you registered, you find something else, and then maybe you change the outcome. And the good thing is that we can actually go and look at the outcome changes, which is the next. But now outcome changes that are made before, when you're already, before you register, we don't see. And I have some results to say that try to get at that later. It's exactly the story we are pursuing. Good, thank you. Now, Now, so let me see. The other thing we're getting is a larger registration delay. It's associated to a larger discontinuity. Yeah. And now the other natural concern here is really, and it goes a bit about what you were saying here. So maybe these are just more credible studies that are registered. There's a different selection. Yeah. And so we have other measures of credibility, such as masking, and all the different versions of masking, and and these are actually significant, yeah. But basically, if we put them, you can see here, pre-registered, non-pre-registered tend to be bad quality, and so for that we want to actually put those as well in the regression. So that's for that we use the caliber test approach, which is a second methodology. And so when we compare Z statistics in a narrow window above or below the significant threshold, yeah. And so the advantage is the regression framework allows you to control for other characteristics of the trial or for fixed effects. But clearly you need to choose the window size and interpret interpretation a bit less clean than the density and discontinuity test. And so once you do that, see here, so here is without sponsor fixed effects. So we see that the pre-registration is significant. So once we actually add these quality controls, they are not significant, and these are significant, which suggests that is really the pre-registration what matters to some extent more than these other things. And this is robust at different windows. Here we do 0.02. If you go back to the picture where you tend to see the discontinuity there, but it works more general. And now we get to the next one. So we find discontinuity in the density at a 5% significant threshold from non-pre-registered trial, but no discontinuity for pre-registered trials. The difference is robust to caliber test controlling for other trial characteristics and sponsor fixed effect, though we lose a bit of significance once we control for sponsor fixed effects because there are not many trials by the same sponsors, which are not pre-registered especially. So no evidence of p-hacking for lower stake secondary outcomes independent of pre-registration status. Yes.
Are the secondary outcomes sort of useless if the primary outcomes don't work out? But if the primary, I just wonder, yes, if you look at people who p-hacked the primary outcomes and succeeded, maybe they p-hacked the secondary outcomes too. But if your primary outcome fails, there's.
Yeah, we can maybe look into that. That's a good point. You might think of it. Yes.
The variant of that, I guess also Carl's question is, when you could divide the outcomes into good outcomes, bad outcomes in some sense, but the good outcomes you want to be significant, bad outcomes you don't. But then you could look among the good outcomes whether there's switching around.
Yes.
If that's the story, right, then you should see the discontinuity in the opposite direction for the good secondary outcomes.
Our take is that most outcomes are good outcomes. But I agree with you that some probably are bad outcomes.
But I think in terms of you were saying side effects before, right? Like if you want to make sure that there's no bad side effects.
I agree. The side effects are typically secondary outcomes to some extent, but that's how.
But then, so I would think of those as the bad outcomes, and then for those you would expect people would select the opposite direction.
Correct. Yes. So in a way, it goes. The work we're doing next goes a bit in that direction, where we really want to look at the outcomes and distinguish potentially of outcome changes. And for that, we look a bit at the textual data on how to declare the outcomes. Yeah? So it's an ongoing project. While the other paper is archived last year. So this one is. So we have a draft. Happy to send it to you. So now we basically the starting point here. We have this joint work with another student of mine. Just finished the master's thesis here with this work. Now Marta Matcher. And so you can see this is what we just had. And so registration signal credibility in clinical trials. So what's the underlying mechanism? Do changes in outcome variables affecting distribution of results? That's the question here. Okay. Now the same sample as before, and what we're going to do. Clearly, the nice thing about this repository, we can see outcome changes dynamically. Now here, as a first step, we look at the initial outcome that you declare when you register, and we look at the last outcome that you have when you take a report. Yeah, for those that report, yeah, you cannot only look at those. And compare initial and final version of the primary outcome. And we look at the medical literature, and people have done a bit of this classification and informally trying to argue things like this, but nobody has really linked everything together. And so we are building a bit on this, what it means to have a major change in the outcome, where you have originally pre-specified outcome now is omitted, or you introduce a new outcome variable, you switch an outcome from primary to secondary, or for secondary to primary, you have a major change in a way, the formulation of the outcome variable. And we clearly, instead, there are maybe some changes in the outcome that are good, you correct some typos, and you add some small details, that seems fine. We have to classify these changes. And for that, basically, we have a title of the outcome, like could be like Leibovitz social anxiety scale, and that is changed, for example, to brief social phobia scale. That's the change. And then you have a description. You typically have a time frame and so on, and then you have a description. Sometimes there is no description. And so we basically try to look at the different versions of the title and the description and see what.
For approval, you're not penalized for that kind of switch.
Yes, you would expect you be potentially penalized. Yeah, and the nice thing about now, you can see it there, and the key question is, I think to make it maybe politically feasible, it was important to allow these modifications. And I think it would be nice to actually think about the theory is the good thing, and that was my question. Yes, it work. So once you have that information, maybe it's actually good to change. And maybe we have to think a bit about the conceptual framework now.
At least in our model, it's useless, right?
Yeah, but it seems to be happening quite a bit, and yeah. And so we basically look at the full description and the short description with basically the title, and we have we found a recent paper that looks and classify outcome changes for a subset of clinical trials. The problem with the most of the literature, they typically focus on particular conditions, and it's very small scale, and they do manual classification of these changes. Here is a larger number of trials and across conditions, but looking mostly done by German investigators. Yeah.
I mean, a variant in which it could be useful, just thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
Which is not part of what I was talking about yesterday. If you think about like the adaptive experiment type situations, right? Where basically the simplest version of an adaptive experiment is you have a pilot phase where you determine what your outcome of your treatment is, and then you have like a trial phase. And then it's perfectly legitimate to use the pilot phase to decide what you're going to do in the trial phase. Yeah, in a sense, you can think about you discover something and then you actually find the real outcome variable here. And that's why I think potentially it might be a good idea to allow for this. Correct. But then you still get new data that is revealed after you do the second pre-registration, but which is different from the idea. You would want to have the early data and the later data. Exactly. So you want them timestamps. Potentially. Yes. That could be an interesting evolution of this regulation, maybe. It might be difficult to, you probably didn't undertake that. You're just a pilot, and then you change very quickly. You might not report. You might want to report a pilot or something to make it more transparent. I mean, the whole point of adaptive experimentation is to be more data efficient, right? To actually deal with that cost. Yes. Right, and I mean, I guess you can think of some kind of updated app as like a crude version of doing adaptive experimentation. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Now what we did an initial manual classification of 500 trials using those criteria that are used in the medical literature. And so overall, these ways we classified, we had a kind of enabled 1,000 trials through this. Yeah? And we use that in a way. If you look at this within this, because these are many of these didn't have trial results reported. While these we only looked at those with results, and there we had no major changes in roughly 30–40%, depending whether pre-registered or non-pre-registered. Yeah.
You see already there is more changes in non-pre-registered, even though non-pre-registered might have additional changes before the registration. And then what we did, we used this machine learning classification. We did 3 approaches, one cosine similarity, and then we used instead, we fine-tune 2 large language models, BERT and BioBERT, and we looked at different performance measure. At the end, naturally took F1 score that weighs geometric average of accuracy, the different criteria here, and corrects for data imbalance, allows for data balances, and then we basically classified all. Eventually, we look at different specifications, but BioBERT is the one that performs the best. And we have here F1 score here. You can see for BioBERT, BERT, and these cosine similarity, and the and when we look at short descriptions as opposed to the full descriptions, we have a slightly more accurate, less noisy measures when you have the short description as opposed to the full description. And so then the question is, there a jump and a significant threshold for all trials? Now here's the first result. We look at major changes on the left and no major changes. You see, when there is major change, there is the discontinuity. When there is no major change, there is no discontinuity. So significant, suggests that this is potentially the channel to which this happens.
So this is what you would expect if you don't split like data collected after before, right? This
Exactly.
is what you would expect this if you have that adaptive design type.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and that's kind of reassuring. It's what you would expect. Like major changes tend to result in you would.
It's reassuring, but in a sense, it's the bad scenario, bad version of this, right? Not the good version.
Yeah, but at least you see the changes and you can adjust potentially for that in a sense. That's the beauty of it, having it reported. Yeah, and now let's look at pre-registered. You see there, once you split pre-registered, you see it here and not here. And so now, and so this is different what we get in the pool data. The pool data, in a way, you see. So we don't have this difference as we have here, yeah. And now, and if you consider non-pre-registered trials, what we see there, we see a discontinuity both when there is a major change and there is no major change. Which this is basically the observation here. Potentially, this suggests that there is undisclosed changes that are made before registering. Also, when there are no major changes, according to our analysis, but the data behaves as if there have been changes. Okay, and so we can basically do the same analysis as we've done before with adding controls by doing the caliber approach, and basically the results seem to survive. So roughly, this is the what I want to talk, and I think let me just summarize here. BioBERT outperforms BERT here, and cosine similarity. We find a significant impact of outcome changes on trial results that suggest the potential manipulation through this channel. So for non-pre-registered trial, we see discontinuity in both groups, and so pre-registration seems to matter. And so the open question for us, the next step is what is the kind of dark side of pre-registration? And maybe now you have this penalty if you change things, and maybe the regulator will not look very closely, as they shouldn't do, and maybe that might prevent you from making changes that should be efficient to make. That's an informal story. We'd like to be where there is a dark side to understand the cost benefits. This is just. Is there a cost in terms of novelty and so on? That's basically what we are. That's roughly the program. There is, I think, a lot of space for further, more systematic work in this area.
An idea that way you would want to please specify the adaptivity, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to the kind of
correct
implementing it exposed by
yes.
I'm assuming that the FDA has like new guidelines from like 3-4 years ago where they do allow that, is my understanding.
Yeah.
which of course kind of requires this kind of complete contingent plan type
Yes,
description, but
which in a way, your model goes a bit along those lines. You can think a generalized version of your model goes
Yeah.
a bit in that direction. Yeah, it might
and
require.
not necessarily the model I presented
But
yesterday,
the generalized version.
more like the stuff we've done on like.
Yeah, combine
experiments.
that with your model, those two things, they might actually go in this direction. Yes. With your 2 lines of research, yeah. Great, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.